Many of the small independent cinemas in British cities in recent years have opened cafes on the premises, where moviegoers can sit over a coffee and discuss how terrible Tony Blair and George W. Bush are. But 2 documentary movies opening at such cinemas this week, continuing the current rise of factual film, are likely to confirm latte-sipping liberals in what they think, while making them question what they drink. One of the documentaries, Black Gold, follows Tadesse Mascala, an Ethiopian coffee farmer, on his campaign to show that African growers are being exploited by Western coffee chains.
And it's just amazing, just how much, not just how much bigger we're getting, but just the lives that we're touching. You know, we're in the people business serving coffee.
This is the first time Sidamo has been involved in famine. And this is the extreme situation because we are having 200 children in 2 weeks' time in another center. That is overwhelming. That's why we had to open this area in a very short time.
A scene from Black Gold, directed by Nick Francis and Mark Francis, which has the feel of a liquid sequel to Morgan Spurlock's anti-hamburger film Super Size Me. The other documentary opening this week is a clear political twin of Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11. Taking Liberties argues that Tony Blair's government has systematically restricted freedom, interspersing stories of thwarted campaigners with cartoons and songs, including a reference to the practice of rendition, secret flights through British airports of American prisoners.
Rendair, the ultimate low-cost airline. We've flown thousands of lucky travelers around the world on our luxury Gulfstream jets. Our routes include all the world's torture hotspots. We'll be stopping to refuel at Prestwick and Manchester airports. Even though this is against international law, the British government would turn a blind eye, so there's no delay to your journey.
An extract from Taking Liberties, directed by Chris Atkins with animation by Simon Robson. To discuss that film and the other campaigning documentary, Black Gold, I'm joined by the journalist Dame Anne Leslie, special correspondent for the Daily Mail, and the human rights lawyer and writer Baroness Helena Kennedy. I'm not very good at these things. I don't know if a Dame goes before a Baroness or what.
I think
I think we'll start with Dame Anne. Taking Liberties, we have interviews, songs, cartoons. Did it add up to a convincing case against Tony Blair?
Well, there's always the problem of viewers' bias. I happen to agree with a lot of its criticisms of Tony Blair on the issue of civil liberties. So in a way, I was on its side. On the other hand, I did get irritated by some of it because I liked all the song and dance stuff. It kept you awake and, you know, the graphics were amusing. But, for example, when they started relating the Reichstag fire, which, as we know, was set by the Nazis, it was a sort of fake, but then they used it as an excuse to destroy civil liberties, with the anti-terror legislation, I'm afraid, despite all the conspiracy theories that there are, Bush and Blair did not actually fly planes into the Twin Towers or put bombs on trains. So I felt that was, you know, a little bit pushing it, really. Otherwise, I quite enjoyed it.
Helena Kennedy, some people might think stereotypically that an attack on human rights abuse in the UK would be your perfect Friday night out, but what did you make of it?
Well, Anne and I here, being on other ends of the political spectrum, come together on this issue because, of course, I am affronted by what's been happening to civil liberties under Blair. And so I, too, was a converted person who was likely to be supportive. And I, like Anne, thought it was very entertainingly done, and I liked the fact that it was humorous. These things can be horribly worthy, and it didn't feel like that. I don't agree with you, Anne, the business about the Reichstag. I didn't think they were saying this is the same. What they were saying is that these drifts take place, and that you can very easily, without realising it.
Well, I thought they were pretty clearly trying to equate Bush and Blair with the Nazis, weren't they?
And it enrages me when I see Stop the War things where they paint onto Blair's face a Hitler moustache and call him Hitler. You know, there's a drift in that direction too.
Also, Helena, some of the witnesses they have, you would take these people apart in court, wouldn't you? At one point, somebody says there hasn't been a single other attack since July the 7th, so that shows they don't need those anti-terror laws. It doesn't prove that at all, does it?
I know, and I've been in court with quite a number of cases since, and some of them, have held up. So it's true that some of it was sort of, if you like, over-egged. But I still think it's so important that we have this debate out there, and there has been a real complacency. I mean, one of the arguments it makes is that, on the one hand, we've got Blair and his Home Secretaries to blame for a hell of a lot of this, and a rather class placid Parliament, but we also, as a public, have been very complacent in somehow not going to the wall on it. I mean, that we haven't been more enraged.
No, because most of the general public thinks, well, I'm not going to put a bomb on a train or fly a plane into a skyscraper. So you end up with this ridiculous thing where you have Walter Wolfgang, yes,
being dragged
out for shouting nonsense at Jack Straw. I mean, the way that they're using sledgehammers to crack nuts, in a way, I totally agree with the film on that. However, there are other things that I would, as a sort of prosecutor, complain about. There is a tendency to believe everything that somebody who's been in Guantanamo says, and they would say that, wouldn't they, and disbelieve everything the Americans say. So I think there was a complete lack of balance.
Can I just raise one thing here, which is that one defence, we haven't been complacent, is that if they are a police state, they're not very efficient because they allow all this stuff to be filmed. I mean, when the police are breaking up these demonstrations, there are always cameras there.
Actually, well, the sweet thing, I thought the British police came out as rather sort of decent blokes, just doing their job and not being too aggressive, and I rather liked that.
Well, except there was that bizarre business of the bus being turned back with a whole crowd of sort of...
I know, but again, but all of that is film. They say everything on film.
Great, it was film, but it was still a disgrace.
Well, Black Gold, Helena, they hope to make you choke on your skinny mochaccino to go, did they?
Do you know, I had a coffee this morning and I did think twice. But, I mean, this is all part of a very new thing, I think, where, and I think Michael Moore and the whole Al Gore film, An Inconvenient Truth, is part of a thing of actually engaging around issues with people who are more likely to go to a movie or watch this on a DVD than they ever would be, they wouldn't go to a political meeting about it. I'm not sure how many people are going to go to the cinema to actually watch this.
Interesting sometimes means boring when used by people.
Well, I didn't think it could sustain itself for 7 to 8 minutes. That was the problem. And I thought it was interesting in seeing things that I didn't know about, and I was shocked by some of its content, but I have to say that it did involve a level of concentration that perhaps was going to be hard.
Yes, in fact, it's, in my view, an extremely bad documentary because it's intensely boring. Now, I'm actually interested in Ethiopia. I've worked there on fair trade issues. But, for example, not one explanation was given for why the coffee price is so low. The reason that coffee price is so low, hence all these poor starving or near starving Ethiopian coffee farmers, is there is an overcapacity. There's huge amounts of coffee in the world because everybody has gone into coffee in the kind of countries that can grow it, and the fact is that the price has fallen. So that is actually the law of supply and demand. It's not the wickedness of the WTO, it's not the wickedness of Starbucks, it's not the wickedness of people who do the futures markets. It's a fact, and the trouble is with...
and that's not enough, because you have to look at the level of profit that's being made. I mean, the profit these farmers are getting, yes, you're right about the nature of markets, but the amount, the greed about the extent of the profit and not being willing to share it more with the people who are the growers.
That argument can be had by people who go to see the film. Just on this point, isn't there a problem with both films? They'd be most enjoyed by people who buy fair trade coffee, they go on anti-war marches. They are preaching to the choir, both these films, aren't they?
I certainly felt that around the coffee one, I was not sure that you were going to actually reach anyone beyond those who already are committed to, the poverty issues and anti-globalization. But I did think that the Civil Liberties film was, by virtue of the fact that this is an issue that crosses political divides, was more likely to reach a wider audience. And it had lots of people in it who just might speak. You had Boris Johnson, you had all manner of folk on it.
Anna, briefly, could either change minds?
I think the Taking Liberties one might, partly because it wasn't overtly left or right, because they had these national treasures, Tony Benn and Boris Johnson on. I think that just might, and it's partly because, people after a while think, hey, is it true that it's a crime if you import a potato
from Poland? Yeah.
So it'd be a lot of sort of, is this true?
Yeah, and the idea that you can't demonstrate in at all. I mean, even if you're somebody in the Women's Institute, you can't go along and demonstrate in Parliament Square. It's a scandal.
I know it is a scandal, and I think it would actually change my people's minds if they were too bored with the subject.
Well, we shall see. You're having the arguments of the film again. Thank you to Anne Leslie and to Helena Kennedy. Black Gold Certificate U and Taking Liberties Certificate 12A are both released nationwide this Friday.